Have you ever stood on the edge of something uncertain, knowing God is leading you forward, but the path ahead feels overwhelming? Maybe it's a relationship, a health challenge, a calling, or a season of change. You know what God has promised, but you just don't understand how it's all going to happen. That's exactly where the Israelites are in Joshua 3. They are standing at the edge of the Jordan River at the flood stage. Behind them is the wilderness they wandered in for 40 years, and ahead of them is the promised land. But it's the in-between that is the impossible obstacle, which is the Jordan. Our last lesson left us with the story of Rahab, and unfortunately that part of the story is on pause. Didn't you want to know? I just wanted to hear the rest of her story this week, but we have to wait because we have to get to the Israelites through the Jordan first. There are 17 references of the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of God's promises was how I like to read that. The Ark of the Lord of all of the earth, signifying God's power and dominion, and then just the Ark. The Ark is the very presence of God. The Ark and the Lord are interchangeable. The Ark is the closest incarnation of the Lord pre-Jesus. And I thought that was a really neat. We tend to forget that they didn't have Jesus at this point, and we have that, and we're so lucky. So I'm going to read Joshua 3, 1 through 4. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. So it was, after 3 days, that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. So in the morning, how many times have we been told, do your devotions in the morning, spend time with God in the morning, exercise in the morning. Everything is showing immediate obedience. Just like when Rahab immediately hung the red cord in our last study. Follow the ark, but keep your distance. This was practical so they could see where to go in a new to them land, but it would also ensure that all of Israel would witness the miraculous parting of the Jordan. But the distance was also to demonstrate deep reverence and respect. In Joshua 3, 5 to 6, and Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And then Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the Ark of the Covenant, cross over before the people. So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. The priests don't quite know their role yet, but they are all told to consecrate themselves, to be ready. Something holy, something big and beautiful is about to happen. How do we consecrate ourselves today? I remember growing up, and my husband and I kind of got the giggles talking about this last night. We would consecrate ourselves every Saturday night when I was a little girl with sponge rollers. My mom would get out. We spent all day getting the house ready, washing the windows, did the grocery shopping, washed the car, all because we were going to church on Sunday. And then we would get all that done, take our showers. We'd always go out for Mexican food, and then we'd come home, and my mom would get out the sponge rollers and roll my sister and I's hair, all for church the next morning. Then she also sewed 3 matching dresses, one for her, one for me, one for my sister, and we always dressed up for church. And so I miss that, but I don't. I mean, I will be honest, I like wearing my blue jeans to church, but I think how we're kind of missing something too in not preparing for church. And so when I come here and I do see women that still dress up for church, I kind of think that's a little refreshing. And then the other thing that Jen mentioned too, which I'd never really thought of, is she said people will fast before communion. And so that taking that communion is breaking that fast. And I thought that was a really beautiful, beautiful way to consecrate ourselves before communion. And I was wondering, are we having communion on Sunday because of it being Easter? No. Okay. Oh, for Good Friday. And I thought that was beautiful. And then the other thing that she does, which I'm going to try because I'm addicted to my phone, is she does not pick up her phone until after church on Sunday. And I thought, ooh, because that's the first thing I do in the morning is I wake up, make my coffee, grab my phone. And so I'm going to fiddle around with that on Sundays and see how that goes. And so I just want you to think, especially with this being Holy Week, how are we consecrating ourselves? Being prepared for how this week is going to end. And then Joshua 3, 7-8. And the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan." So I took that as the Jordan didn't dry up. They went in the Jordan wet. Is that how you guys trying to balance that ark? And their feet touch the edge? Okay. Parted. Okay. So what the Lord was doing there was he was setting clear expectations. Do A, B, and C will happen. That's how I was reading that. Standing in the Jordan will give a clear visual link between Joshua to Moses standing in the Red Sea. And I want you to think about this. The priests carrying that ark had to step into the river first, showing trust and faith that God would part it. They weren't standing there and it's like, okay, come on. They just went. God will often ask for obedience before he reveals the outcome. I personally would prefer for God to show me the plan, wouldn't you all? And then I'll step in. But God says, trust me enough to step, and then you will see my work. Where is God asking you to step? What Jordan are you facing? Faith is not the absence of fear. It is choosing obedience in the presence of uncertainty. And Joshua 3, 9-12. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over the Jordan on this dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the water of the Jordan. Am I ahead of myself? I am way ahead of myself, you guys. I'm sorry. My pages, I went straight from 3 to 4. So let me backtrack here. Back to Joshua 3, verse 9. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Gingasites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. Phew. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take up yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man for every tribe. You will know that the living God is among you. Why is living God significant? It's because the gods of these 7 tribes were not living. They were thought up by man and made by the hands of man. Remember, even Rahab believes in their living God. And then 12 and 13. Now therefore take yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man from every tribe, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from upstream, and they will stand as a heap. It's a very similar description to that of the Red Sea, so it's causing remembering. Even though I question that now because there probably weren't many people there. Well, Joshua would have been. So Joshua is remembering. Then in verses 14 through 15, so it was when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And as those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, there's Catherine's edge, for the Jordan overflows at all its banks during the whole time of harvest. And Jen brings up Dale Ralph Davis's description of the Jordan, which I thought was really neat, because I've been to the Jordan and I kind of questioned it because the part I was at was really little and calm. It was really dirty, but I was but then when you read his description, it's pretty overwhelming. It said the floodplain was packed with tangled brush and jungle growth. Hence it was not the river so much as the jungle was difficult to cross. The fords of the Jordan being as much ways through the jungle as through the river. Then there was the river channel itself, which, if similar to 19th century AD conditions, was from 90 to 100 feet wide and 3 to 12 feet deep. The current was strong because of the drop in elevation, which was about 40 feet per mile by the Sea of Galilee, and an average of 9 feet per mile overall. This means that the river Israel faced that springtime was no placid stream, but a raging torrent, probably a mile wide and covering a mass of tangled brush and jungle growth. So this removes any worldly explanation that this crossing was nothing less than a miracle of God. And something Jen brought up too is in this region, earthquakes can part the water. But she said even if that is what happened that day, who cares? Because the timing of the Israelites being right there when the earthquake happened to part the water was a miracle in itself. So it's a timing. So she said, who cares how it happened? It happened at the perfect time. Joshua 3:15 through 17. And those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks. That the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaretan. So the waters that went down into the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the river. The power of remembering, the chiasm, which I have never heard that word until I started doing this Bible study. And I hope I can learn to see that in different lessons. I hope that that's something I'll remember because it's really a beautiful escalation of how to read the Bible. Then Joshua 4:1 through 8. And it came to pass when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, 1 man from every tribe, and Joshua said to them, Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in a time to come, saying, What do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant, Lord. The ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones will be for a memorial to the children. And the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged and laid them down there. God knows something about us we tend to forget. We forget his faithfulness in past seasons when we face new challenges. So he builds remembrance into their journey. And then Joshua 4, verse 9, I'm going to read it out of the NIV version. It says, Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. 12 tribes, 12 men, 12 stones, 7 times. Joshua 4, 10 and 11. So the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people hurried across. And then it came to pass when all the people had completely crossed over that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. So they hurried across. I don't think anybody was dilly-dallying that day. And if we've experienced, we used to live in Southern California, and we would go to the coast a lot. If you've ever experienced like a riptide, or even we were walking along the beach one night, we walked down to dinner. Well, we didn't factor in that when we walked back, the tide would be up, and there were rocks, and the waves were crashing up and our kids were little. And to feel that power of that water, you talk about respect. We were screaming our heads off for somebody to come help us because there were all these houses up on top. And finally, somebody came out and let us crawl up the rocks into their backyard. But I'm sure that's the fear they were feeling too. All right, the other analogy I thought too was like the Grand Canyon has that big glass decking you can walk on. I don't think I could walk on it. I think that's a big woman complex. But so I'm sure there was a lot of fear that day, but trust at the same time. Then Joshua 3:12 through 14 says, "Now therefore take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man from every tribe, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord." Am I wrong again? I keep going back from 3 to 4, you guys. Old lady problems. Joshua 4:12 through 14. "And the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for what crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as he had feared Moses all the days of his life. And on that day God said it, and it was so. 3 days of waiting and then passing through the waters. As always, if we are patient, the Lord will go before us, and then is our rear guard and covers behind us." And I loved the Psalm 139, verse 5, partly because I'm a quilter. This never hit me until this past week. It says, "You hem me in behind and before. You lay your hand upon me." God's intimate knowledge, protection, and presence completely surrounds us. I have a quilt here. I should have pulled it out to show you, but a binding kind of does that. If you don't bind a quilt, that quilt's going to start unraveling. And so I'm going to look at, and that's the worst part of quilting. I hate doing the binding, but now I'm going to remember this, and it's going to become my most meaningful part. Joshua 4:15 through 18. "Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Command the priests who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, Come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass, when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests touched the dry land, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed its banks as before." I talked about the earthquakes. It talks about that too, then the earthquakes in that region, but that doesn't matter. And then Joshua 4:19 through 21. "Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they had taken out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What are these stones? And I kind of did a side-by-side of Exodus and Joshua with the Passover lamb, the 10th day of the first month, the 12 stones, the 10th day in the first month. Joshua 4:21 to 24. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, When your children asking their fathers in time to come say, What are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. All the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. God's law is an instruction book on how to be human. God knows you intimately. He knows us more intimately than anybody. We need memorials to remember the miracle of deliverance from slavery and sin. Memorials are significant to remember how costly an event was and to not forget. And we talked about that a little bit during small groups. We have the Holocaust Memorial, the 9/11 Memorial, the beaches of Normandy, and those are all really costly events that have happened in time that we need to remember. And then in Joshua 5:1-7. So it was when all the kings of the Amorites were on the west side of the Jordan, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until we had crossed over, that their heart melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. At the time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives for yourselves and circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time." So Joshua made flint knives for himself and circumcised the sons of Israel at the hill of the foreskins. And that is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt who were males, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on their way after they had come out of Egypt. For all the people who came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people who were men of war came out of Egypt were consumed, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord swore that he would not show them the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers that he would give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then Joshua circumcised their sons, whom he raised up in their place, for they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. So it's not the same men being circumcised twice, but the next generation who were born during the wilderness wandering. Then in Joshua 5, verses 8 and 9, so it was when they had finished circumcising all the people that they stayed in their places in the camp. They were healed. Until they were healed. The Lord said to Joshua, "This day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." Therefore the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. To this day, Gilgal means rolled away. You would think God would have told them, "Now go, take your promised land," the minute that they crossed the Jordan. Wouldn't you be ready to? I think they were hungry, they were ready to be settled, and yet God said, "No, you need to wait. You need to stop, you need to pause, you need to consecrate yourselves," specifically the men. Circumcision is a sign of a covenant that had been neglected during the wilderness years. Why here? Why now? Because before they step into victory, God wants their hearts to be aligned with him. He wants their whole heart. God is more concerned with who they are becoming than how quickly they move forward. Sometimes we want God to rush us into the next thing, all the time for me. But God says, "Not yet. I want your whole heart first." In Joshua 5:10-12. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month, at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. Passover is a reminder of when God rescued them from Egypt. When he made a way, there was no way. Where he made a way, there was no way. And then something remarkable happens. The manna stops. For 40 years, God had provided food from heaven every single day. But now as they step into the promised land, the provision changes. They begin to eat from the land itself. Why would God stop the manna? Because they are entering into a new season. The God who provided in the wilderness will continue to provide in the promised land, but not in the same way. God's provision is always miraculous, even in the mundane. Sometimes we struggle not because God is providing, but because he's not providing in the way we're used to. It's kind of taking life for granted. We're all guilty of that. And we are so blessed in this country, we have no idea what doing without really means. But the same God is still faithful. In these chapters, we see a powerful pattern for our own lives. Follow God's presence even when the path is unclear. Step forward in obedience even before you see the outcome. Pause and let God prepare your heart. Remember, remember, remember his faithfulness. Trust him in every new season. We all still have different Jordans in front of us, but the same God who parted the waters is still leading, and he's still asking, will you trust me enough to step in? Pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for going before us. I thank you that you don't ask us to walk alone. Help us to trust you when we cannot see the path. Give us the courage to step forward in obedience. Remind us of your faithfulness in every season. Prepare our hearts for what you are doing, especially during this holy week. And help us to follow you, Lord, one step at a time. Lord, help us in this next week just to pause, to consecrate ourselves, to really prepare our hearts for what we're about to experience on Friday and Sunday. Lord, be with us now. Help us to just meditate and chew on your word this week, Lord. Just pave the way for us this week, Lord. We know that you're going before us, and we know you're going to hem us in behind us. In your precious name we pray. Amen.